We're going to keep this a little bit shorter, not real short, but a little bit shorter, so you can get out of here early. You can go out and get some coffee, whatever you want to do before then. But we want to finish with just some worship again. So I asked him if he'd just do one song up front, come back up in a little bit, and worship. So a quick little announcement. Before you leave, if you didn't get one of these, grab one of these schedules. This is the last night of the Mind for 2019. What? Can you believe it? 2019 is almost done. But January 14th, we start back on a Tuesday night, January 14th. We're going to jump into Hebrews, and I'm telling you, you definitely don't want to miss that first one because we're going to set up the whole book. We're going to be looking in the book of Hebrews for the whole semester of spring, and you don't want to miss that first one, so mark your calendars, January 14th. So I want you to think of a town in your home state. How many of you are from a different state than Arizona? Raise your hand. All right, quite a few of you. Even if you're from Arizona, you can play this game. So I want you to think of a town in your state that's it's kind of the lowest town in your state. When people from your state mention this town, everybody knows that's kind of the bottom of the barrel, if you will. Okay, you have that in your mind? Because here's what we're going to do. I want everybody to shout out the name of that place in just a moment. I'm going to count to 3. You just shout out the name of the town in your state, okay? It's kind of the bottom of the barrel. When people talk about coming from that town, you're like, really? You're from there? Okay, got it? Everybody has the town? All right, on the count of 3, we're all going to shout it out. 1, 2, 3. Butte. All right, so I'm from Montana, as I shared. Ours is Butte, Montana. Anybody know anything about Butte, Montana? Glendive? That's even worse. Butte, Montana, at the turn of the last century, late 1800s, early 1900s, some of the wealthiest people in the country were in Butte, Montana. If you go to Butte, Montana today, you'll wonder why in the world any wealthy person went there. But you can tour mansions. Here's some of the wealthiest people. Changed a lot. By the time I was younger, Butte, Montana, we would actually call it Butt, Montana. B-U-T-T-E is how you spell it. We would mispronounce it and call it Butt, Montana. It was a dirty place. It was a mining town. Anaconda was right outside of it. There's this whole little corridor. You had Deer Lodge near there. My father-in-law grew up in Anaconda near Butte. Butte and Anaconda were such a rough town that my father-in-law would tell me when their football teams would play each other, they would always have to have the police, the entire police force would come out and escort the teams onto the bus. Deer Lodge was still that way. It's kind of in the same corridor. When I was coaching up there, Deer Lodge had a winning streak on their home court that went back like 2 or 3 years. Our team went in there, the team I was coaching, and we beat them on their home court. They had to have the police come and escort us to our bus because it was just a rough town. Everybody standing out there just ready to fight you. That was kind of the place. So when you talked about kind of the ugly, disgusting, dirty, gross, man, you can't believe you're from there, Butte, Montana. Guess where it was where Jesus was from? In Israel. Do you know what the name of the town was? Nazareth. Nazareth. If you said you were from Nazareth, seriously, from Nazareth? Remember Nathaniel and Philip, if you remember, one of them goes to the other and says, hey, I want you to come and meet Jesus of Nazareth. Another guy's like, Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth? So we've been taking a peek behind the story, the history behind the story. We want to do that again. Open up to Matthew chapter 2. We're going to be looking at the story behind the story. I'm going to roll out the whiteboard in a moment here, and I want you guys, just to make me feel better about myself, I drew a map on the whiteboard. I have verses on there, so just give me a ooh when I pull it out here. Like, just make me feel better about myself here, okay? All right, here we go. Not yet, because then I know you're lying because you haven't seen it yet. When it gets in the light. Don't do it yet, because I know you'll be lying to me, all right? When I reveal it. Yeah, I love you guys. I love you guys. All right. You guys are awesome. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of do a behind-the-scenes look at Matthew chapter 2. We've been looking in recent weeks at some of the other stories. Remember, we looked at Luke 2 if you were here this weekend. We dug into it a little bit more, and we were reminded of the sovereignty of God, that in order for God to fulfill a prophecy that was given 700 years before, he had to get Mary and Joseph from Nazareth down to Bethlehem, and he used some of the most powerful, influential men in the world at that time, but they were also very wicked and evil men. And it's a reminder to us about the sovereignty of God, that he is in absolute control. God causes some things, he allows some things, but he is in control of all things. We're going to be reminded again of another part of God seen in what Jesus did and how this was fulfilled. So, Matthew chapter 2, remember if we looked at Matthew 1, we would see at the very end of Matthew 1 that he's given this name, Emmanuel, which means God with us. Matthew chapter 1 finishes introducing the Messiah. He finishes up saying, hey, it fulfills the fact that he was born of a virgin, fulfills a prophecy given Isaiah 7:14, and then he gives this name, Emmanuel, means God with us. We're going to see from what happens near the end of Matthew chapter 2, another part of Jesus that, we need to worship, especially this time of year at Christmas. Another one that we saw near the end of, or at the beginning of Matthew chapter 2 is this prophecy that he would be born in Bethlehem. I just mentioned that. And now we're going to skip down to Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 13. I'm just going to read some of this and we'll fill in some of these things. But verse 13 says, after the wise men were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. So let me catch you up to the story. Remember, the wise men come in and they're saying, hey, we heard about this king of the Jews. Herod's like, I don't know what you're talking about, and brings in the scribes. The scribes tell them where they're at, or what the prophecy is, Micah chapter 5. So then they leave to head down to Bethlehem. After the wise men were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, flee to Egypt with the child and his mother, the angel said. Stay there until I tell you to return, because Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. That night, Joseph left for Egypt with the child and Mary, his mother, and they stayed there until Herod's death. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet, I called my son out of Egypt, Hosea 11:1. So the fulfillment is now, in Matthew chapter 2, we already have two prophecies that were fulfilled. And actually, God is using Herod in some ways to fulfill both of them. So now they're going to Egypt, because in Hosea chapter 11:1, it says out of Egypt. But if you heard me emphasize something in that, I emphasized the word prophet. Prophet. I'm going to come back to that. Prophet. What the Lord had spoken through the prophet. Okay, now I'm going to skip some verses. The next verses tell us about Herod ordering the death of all the babies. And actually that fulfills Jeremiah. So there's another prophecy that's fulfilled there. Skip down to verse 19. Watch this. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. Get up, the angel said. Take the child and his mother back to the land of Israel, because those who were trying to kill the child are dead. Who are those? Herod the Great. Remember, Herod the Great dies in 4 BC? So he's now dead. We're going to come back and talk about that in a moment. Verse 21. So Joseph got up and returned to the land of Israel with Jesus and his mother. Where did they go? Watch this, verse 22. See, most of us do. We go, well, they went to Nazareth. They do end up in Nazareth, but that's not where they went first. Watch this, verse 22. But when he learned that the new ruler of Judea, this is Judea, so this is my map. Pretty good map here. Mediterranean Sea, Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea. Okay, this is where Nazareth is up here. Jerusalem is down here. Bethlehem is down here. This is where Egypt is. So remember, this is where Mary and Joseph were. God gets them through the census to go down to Bethlehem, which fulfills a prophecy given in Micah. Then they go down to Egypt. That fulfills a prophecy in Hosea. Then an angel comes and says, it's okay to go back. Now they're going to go back. Some of you know they end up in Nazareth, but that's not where they go at first. They go here. This is Judea. It says that they go back to Judea. Why would they go back to Judea? Why do you think they would go back to Judea? Just shout it out. Not everyone at once. I didn't get that. I didn't hear it. Because you're all talking at the same time, just one at a time. Why do you think? There's no right or wrong answer. We're just guessing. It doesn't tell us. Why do you think there's two cities here? They went back to Judea, probably to Bethlehem or Jerusalem. That's probably where they were going to take him to. So they were in Egypt. They get told Herod is dead. You can go back. They're not going back to Nazareth. They're going here. Yep. So we're going to see that in a little bit. We're going to see that Herod's son is here. That's part of the story. In fact, that's the soap opera story we're going to see in a moment. But why, and again, we're just guessing. It doesn't tell us. See, I always grew up, I knew the Christmas story, so I knew that he was born in Bethlehem, they ran to Egypt, and he ends up growing up in Nazareth. The part I missed is the verses we're looking at actually says that Joseph was moving back to Judea. He's going to get warned a second time about Herod's son. But why do you, and again, we're just guessing, why do you think Joseph and Mary would decide, let's actually raise Jesus in Bethlehem or Jerusalem rather than Nazareth? That seemed to be their initial plan. A better place? Definitely a better place. Work? Yep, work. Employment as a carpenter probably had more. Anything to do with the tribe, did you say? Yeah, the tribe or family, for sure, because remember, he had to go down here because this is where family was from, so we had family there. In fact, it seems to, the Christmas story seems to indicate that they weren't here for just a few nights. I think sometimes we think that, but if you look closely at it, the wise men, they didn't actually come that night. So like I was joking a few weeks ago, if you want to be a little more real with your manger scene at home, you have to take the wise men and go put them in the living room because they actually, it says they came to a house. So they had probably moved, maybe they had been there for a few days, weeks, or months, but they weren't in the little stable when the wise men came. How long they were in Bethlehem, we don't know, other than it looks like they started to live there before they were warned to flee because Herod was going to kill all the baby boys. How young, or what was the age that Herod was going to kill them? Two and under. So, does that mean that Herod, we don't, this is all guessing. We don't know for sure. But did that mean that when Herod said, when did the star appear to you? Maybe they said 2 years ago? So is Jesus 2 years old now? Have they been there for 2 years? We don't know. We don't know. They might have been there for months, weeks, maybe even up to a year or 2 years. Whatever the case, they had been there for a little while. And so as some of you said, maybe that meant that it was easier for him to get work there. Maybe it meant that he had family there. Maybe it meant that they had found a good place to live there. What else? Religious? Yeah. Whether it's Bethlehem or Jerusalem, if you're going to raise the Messiah, Mary and Joseph know who he is, remember? Because God has sent an angel, and the angels announced this is the long-awaited Messiah. If you're going to raise the Messiah, what better place than Jerusalem or just outside of Jerusalem? So maybe, again, we're guessing, the Bible doesn't tell us, but maybe that they're going, hey, maybe Mary and Joseph one night sat down, put Jesus to bed, and then they're sitting there going, what better place to raise the Messiah than right near the temple? I mean, what if Jesus, every week we can be up there in Jerusalem at the temple? Yeah, I don't know. But whatever the case, we see that it seems like this is where they were going to go back to. Now, let me change this question a little bit. Why would they not go up to Nazareth? Yeah, Mary's still scorned. In fact, there's going to be, if you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John carefully, 30-some years later, they will still be insinuating a little bit that she got pregnant out of wedlock, remember? And how many people are going to buy that it was the Holy Spirit? Never happened before. Never will happen again. So there's probably a lot of talk, and it's a village of about 200 people. So everyone knows you. So they're probably going, that's not probably the best place to go back to. So look at the verses again. Watch this. Look at verse 22. Matthew 2, verse 22. But when he learned, that's Joseph, when Joseph learned that the new ruler of Judea was Herod's son, Archelaus, he was afraid to go there, meaning Judea, this region here. Then, after being warned in a dream, he left for the region of Galilee. So see, then he left Egypt, go here. He's warned in the dream again. So now they leave Judea and they go up. So the family, verse 23, so the family went and lived in a town called Nazareth. And this fulfilled what if you have your Bibles open, what does it say? Prophets, right? Is there an S on the end of it? Go back earlier in the chapter and look at when it's talking about Jeremiah and Hosea and Micah. There's not an S on the end of it. And again, it's one of those little details that we look at sometimes and go, so? Oh, because once again, the critics always said, so we have 4 prophecies that are fulfilled in Matthew chapter 2. We can find exactly where that one is. We can find exactly where that one is. We can find exactly where that one is. And then it says this fulfills the prophecy that he was going to be born in Nazareth, except there is no prophecy that said Jesus would come from Nazareth. But, again, we don't know for sure, but I think that's exactly why Matthew put prophets. He changed it. Fulfilled a prophet, fulfilled a prophet, fulfilled a prophet, fulfilled a prophecy, or prophets, plural. So it seems that what he's saying now is he's tying it to, and I just put a couple of these, there's a lot more of them, but there's several prophecies that point to the fact that Jesus is going to have a very common upbringing or a very common life. If someone can someone just look up Isaiah chapter 53? You know, we don't have mics. Let me just read it to you. Isaiah 53 verse 2. Write it down. Isaiah 53 verse 2. Here's what it says. It's a prophecy about the coming Messiah. And it says, for he, talking about the future Messiah, will grow up before him like a young plant, like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. So there's this prophecy that's pointing to the coming Messiah. And it's basically saying he's going to be a common, normal-looking person. He had a common, normal name. I know now we think like Jesus was like this special name. If you would have been in Jerusalem during one of the festivals when it would swell to almost 1 million people, according to the first century Jewish historian Josephus, and you would have stood up on something high in the temple courtyards, and there's hundreds of people in there, you would have said, Jesus! Or it would have been, Yeshua! You might have had a dozen people or 24 people turn around and look. He had a common name. In fact, prophet Isaiah said he's actually going to be so common that when you look at him, he would just look like one of us. He didn't have a halo. He didn't like float around. There weren't angels above him constantly going, whoo. I mean, if you walked by Yeshua, you would not have even known. He's just one of us. Psalm chapter 22, read that psalm. There's a lot of prophecies that point to some of the Jesus' last words are in that psalm, but it's another place where it talks about him being despised, lowly. So it seems that what Matthew was saying when he said this fulfilled the prophets, plural, that he may be referencing the fact that several prophets spoke to the fact that Jesus was actually going to come from very humble beginnings, lowly beginnings. That's very important for us to get because we're going to talk about the importance of that and how that's tied to this. Matthew 1 ends with God with us. Matthew 2, there's another God blank blank that's so important for us to get. Let me give you a little background of history, though. Here's what happened. I love history. I'm going to geek out on history a little bit, like I said, because there's all of this history in these few verses here that we miss. What happens is Herod the Great dies. When Herod the Great dies, remember he was 37 BC to 4 BC. He was insane. He was the one that was going to kill all or tried to kill Jesus, killed the babies under 2. He's the one, like I said, if you were here this weekend, ordered a bunch of Jews arrested and told his sister, when I die, kill them all. Thankfully, his sister didn't follow through with it, but he was insane. He dies in 4 BC. Now, remember, he was king of this whole area, but he's king under what? Under Caesar. So he has to get whatever his succession plan is okayed by Caesar. But because his last few years he was so insane and so jealous and so worried that some of his sons or daughters were going to try to take his throne, he changed his succession plan 6 different times. And in fact, on his deathbed, he killed one of his sons, ordered the death of one of his own sons who was part of the succession plan and changed it, but it was never okayed under Caesar. So what he did is he actually said, when he died, he said, here's what I want. I want my kingdom split up, and I want my son Archelaus, we just read about him, and I want my son Antipas, and I want my son Philip. I want them to kind of take different parts of the kingdom. But he dies, and the succession plan wasn't okayed by Caesar. So Archelaus and Antipas both get on a boat, and they head to Rome. They head across the Mediterranean Sea to Rome because they're going to go stand in front of Caesar and they're going to argue that they have the rights to all of it. Antipas is actually the older brother. Archelaus got the better piece of it. So they're going there to argue, hey, we believe we should get it. So they go before the Roman Senate, they go before Caesar. The Senate is actually all, we know this from history, the Senate is all saying, Caesar, give it to Antipas. Because Archelaus is as crazy as his dad. And this is how crazy Archelaus was. This is why, remember it says there that the angel warned him about Archelaus. Right before Herod died, Herod actually ordered that a statue of the Roman eagle, they would have it on their shields and everything, that it would be put up on one of the entrances to the temple, the Jewish temple. To the Jews, that was blasphemy, that was idolatry. So right after Herod dies, two key rabbis convinced their students to go into Jerusalem and tear it down. And some of the students do that. Archelaus finds out, he orders those students arrested, and he has them burned alive. It's near Passover. Now there's a huge riot during Passover. Archelaus is a lot like his dad, Herod the Great, so the way he deals with these things is he said, just go kill them. And so they slaughtered 3,000 Jews in the streets of Jerusalem. Now, if you ever get to go visit Israel, when you go to Old Town Jerusalem, it's not huge. And 3,000, again, in history, sometimes we read numbers like that, and we're like, yeah, 3,000 people. Remember 9/11? Remember how that shocked our nation of 300 plus million people when something over 2,000 were killed? Think of a nation this small. 3,000 were slaughtered. I mean, there had to be blood just running in the streets. So when they get to Rome, the Senate is saying to Caesar, don't put him in charge. He's as crazy as his dad. But Caesar says, you know what? I'm going to actually go with what Herod the Great wanted. So he puts Archelaus over Judea, but he will not allow them to be called kings. If you read about it later on, you see they were called tetrarchs, and there was another title. He doesn't want them called kings anymore. He's trying to lighten their authority. So Archelaus gets Judea. Herod Antipas gets the Galilee region. Remember, this is Nazareth up here. That's why Joseph decides not to go here, and they actually go up here. Antipas actually gets both of these. Philip gets this little piece up here. Sister, she gets a little tiny piece down here. This is the sister that Herod actually said, hey, kill all those Jews in Jericho. Jericho's over here. Kill all those Jews in Jericho when I die. She didn't do it, but she gets this little piece. Here's the part that you want to know for what we're looking at. Archelaus, because this is going to help you even understand a little bit later in the Bible. I'm sorry if I'm geeking out on history. You guys okay with this? You with me? Yeah. Okay. I love this stuff because there's so much of the Bible that you read and you don't get the behind the scenes history, and sometimes you're scratching your head going, I don't understand it. So Archelaus, if you wonder why Jesus is going to trial and he's standing before Pilate, who's a Roman governor of this, what happened? Herod the Great ruled over this, and he hands it off to his son. What happened is that Archelaus was so insane and so crazy that a group of Jews actually went out to Rome and began to tell Caesar, you've got to change. You've got to get rid of him. And so he does. He finally actually gets rid of Archelaus, and in, I think it's 6 AD or something like that, he actually starts putting a Roman governor in charge of this area, which is why when Jesus now goes on trial, he's not before Herod or any of Herod's family. He's actually before Pilate. Except there was one Herod he was in front of. Remember, he had 6 trials the night before he was killed. All night long, they drag him back and forth. He goes before Pilate, goes before the high priest, and he goes before Herod. What Herod? Herod the Great is dead. Herod Antipas. This is the Herod. This is what will get confusing because you read in the Bible sometimes. Someone came up to me last week and said, wait, if Herod the Great died in 4 BC, then who's this Herod that's killing John the Baptist, beheading John the Baptist? This one right here, Herod Antipas. He's actually the one that Jesus would go before in the trials. So that tells us now a little behind the scenes on why Mary and Joseph are in Egypt. They have little baby Jesus. We're guessing they may have gone, you know what? Judea is the place to raise our son. We don't want to go back to Nazareth. Everybody's going to be talking. They're always going to be making these insinuations that Mary got pregnant out of wedlock. Let's raise him in Bethlehem or Jerusalem. But then they head back here, and then they get warned. Archelaus is as crazy as his dad. You do not want to be there. So they go up to Nazareth. This is the part that's that's connected to you and I, though, today, all these years later. Because of that, you see over and over and over again that Jesus is referred to as Jesus of Nazareth, which isn't a high esteemed title. That's like saying Pat from Butte, Montana. No, really? You're from Butte? Your IQ must be low and you just must love to fight. That was Nazareth. In fact, look at this. Open up to John chapter 18. If you have your Bibles, flip over to John chapter 18. The background to this is Jesus, last night of his life before he's going to be crucified, he celebrated the Passover with his disciples. He's washed their feet. He's said, one of you is going to betray me. And then they leave Jerusalem. They drop down into the Kidron Valley. They go up to the Mount of Olives. Jesus tells some of his disciples to stay here. He goes off. He prays 3 times. God, is there any other way? Take this cup from me. Not my will, but your will. John chapter 18, starting in verse 4, then Judas and the soldiers come. Verse 4, John 18, verse 4, Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out. So he goes out to meet him. He went out and he asked, watch this. He asked them, who is it you want? What do they say? Jesus of Nazareth. They replied. I love these verses because I heard these verses hundreds of times. I never put this together until fairly recently. He doesn't deny that title, nor has he ever. Throughout his ministry. In fact, remember I just told you when Philip and Nathaniel are talking, and one of them, I'm confused, that's why I'm avoiding which one it is. Does anybody remember? Is it Nathaniel that goes to Philip or Philip that goes to Nathaniel? Who cares? Okay, I don't either. All right, so one of them goes to the other one and says, hey, I want you to come and meet Jesus of Nazareth. And the other one's like, Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth? And then Jesus has that title, Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus, and he never avoids it. And it's not a good title. And in fact, on the last night, he goes out, who are you looking for? Jesus of Nazareth. And he doesn't say, don't call me that. I'm a king. Don't you know who I am? But look at his answer. Oh, this is so good. Jesus of Nazareth, they replied, and he said, yeah, but he literally said this, I am. And what happens to them? Remember 1,500 years before this, when Moses is out in the wilderness and he looks over and he sees that bush and it's on fire, but it's not burning up. And he goes over and then God is saying, I want you to go set my people free. And Moses starts making all the lame excuses. And one of them is like, I don't even know what your name is. What if they ask me what your name is? And he says, tell them, I am. And I am became one of the names or the titles or the descriptions of God. I am who I am. What God was saying through that title is he says, I am the only self-existent, self-reliant being in the universe. Everything else in the universe relies on something or someone to exist, not me. I am who I am. You and I cannot exist without food and water and other things. God is saying, I rely on nothing or no one. I am. And it became one of the titles. So in the garden on the last night of his life, when he steps out to them, he says, who are you looking for? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth, this very lowly, humiliating title that he's never argued with. He's known as Jesus of Nazareth, but in the very next phrase, I am. And I don't know if we don't know for sure, but whatever, maybe there was a glimpse of the Shekinah glory of God, but something makes them all go, boom. And then he'll say it a second time, I am. Oh, you should write this passage down and go look at this at other times, because this is a passage where we see this. Remember the title of him in Matthew 1? God with us. And in John 18, it's a perfect picture of God with us. He's saying, I am Jesus of Nazareth. I am the carpenter that grew up in a very lowly, humble setting. Spent most of my life, 30-some years there. That's me. But you know who I also am? I am the self-existent, self-reliant God. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that awesome? Okay, so here's a question for us. Why of all the places do you think that he chose Nazareth? I mean, he could have gone to Jerusalem, could have gone to Bethlehem. I mean, again, we saw God's all powerful. He could have gotten rid of Archelaus and said, you know what? I want my son to grow up in Jerusalem, the holy city where the temple is. I want my son to grow up in Bethlehem. There's family there. Joseph's going to have a job. Well, why would he choose Nazareth? It's not as easy. Say that again. Fulfills scripture, fulfills the prophets plural, seems to be this idea. Humility. Low. Is that what I heard? Yeah, lowly. Relatable. Oh, I like that word. Relatable. Oh man, now I'm getting my spelling issue again. Is there an E there? No, relatable, like this? Okay, see, this is why I fill this out before you guys get here. Relatable, yeah. Oh, you guys are touching on, I think, why. Here's the other interesting about the Galilee. Remember, even Peter at one point was made fun of because he was a Galilean. They were kind of less than Jews up here because there were so many Gentiles. Fact, just about 5 miles from Nazareth was one of the biggest Roman forts that they had in this entire area. So there was a ton of Roman soldiers there. Fact, they would actually call this the Jewish, it was almost a mocking, a phrase that would mock them. They would call them Jewish Gentiles. And I wonder if part of the reason, I think all of these are true, but part of it is he didn't just come for the Jews, he also came for the, and that's probably most of us in here. To save them? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Here's what's interesting, and it goes along with what you're saying. You go all of this up here. Where did the church start? Jerusalem. Remember, that's where Jesus ascends into heaven on the Mount of Olives, and he tells them, stay here, because the Spirit's going to come on you. When the Spirit comes on you, he's going to bring power. Acts 1:8, power to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And here's what happened. Starts in Jerusalem, 5,000 people come to become Jesus followers, and then a couple more thousand, 3,000, hundreds here. And then it starts, especially because of persecution, it starts going out like this, and then it goes up here, goes up here. And in fact, right up in here becomes one of the central places, Antioch, which is where Paul comes from. But this is interesting because, again, the relatable piece is so important. The relatable. Let me, God with us, if we go with Matthew 2, what might we say? I like this word relatable. What's a word that we could fill in here? The fact that he was a Nazarene. Poor. Humble. Among. Oh, God among us. Oh, that wasn't even the one I was going to write down. I almost like that better. All right, this is the one I was going to write down, but I'm going to write this one too. But I'll write mine because I can spell it. Like. God like us or God among us. See, I think what Matthew 1 closes with this idea that he's Emmanuel, God with us. But then Matthew 2 closes and he's going to be known as Jesus of, that's like Pat of Butte. It's not a good thing. So it's almost like in the first 2 chapters, we're reminded that Jesus is God with us. He was fully God and fully man. But when we get to Matthew 2, we're going, when we say he was fully man, I'm talking that he was like us. He grew up with humble beginnings. He didn't grow up in a palace. How many in here grew up in a palace? What? You did? Oh, cool. I want to talk to you afterwards then. Yeah. Most of us just have normal Humble beginnings. Most of us aren't known much beyond our friends and family. Son, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm not from Butte. No, that's right. Yeah, I'm a citizen of the kingdom now. Yes, and I love what you're doing because again, Philippians 2 says this Jesus of Nazareth, can anything come out of good out of Nazareth? Philippians 2, every knee will bow and every tongue confess and declare him as Lord. He is King of kings and Lord of lords, King of all kings and Lord of lords. And you're right, I'm not Pat of Butte or Pat of Missoula, or I'm actually son of the king now. And if you've put your faith and trust in Jesus, you are too. Here's what I want us to hold on to, and I just want us to close. We're going to close a little early. We're going to just worship, but here's what I want us to worship. I want to close with Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16, which is what Jesus of Nazareth is a reminder. So the writer of Hebrews says, Hebrews 4:14, therefore, since we have this great high priest, Jesus, who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. Verse 15, for we do not have a high priest, Jesus, who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. We don't serve a God who doesn't understand what it means to be a lowly, humble human being. You know why? Because he was a lowly, humble human being. That was part of who he was. He didn't choose to grow up in Jerusalem. He didn't choose to grow up in a palace. He grew up as a guy from Nazareth. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he didn't sin. Let us, verse 16, so because of this truth, let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Let me read that how Eugene Peterson paraphrased it. Listen to this. Now that we know what we have, this Jesus, this great high priest with ready access to God, let's not let that slip through our fingers. We don't have a priest who's out of touch with our reality. We don't have a priest that doesn't understand what it's like to bury his father. We don't have a priest who doesn't understand what it's like to stand at the grave of a friend and weep. We don't have a priest who doesn't understand what it's like to be hungry and tired. We don't have a priest who doesn't understand. We have a priest who understands what it's like to be looked down on, mocked and belittled. Jesus of Nazareth. We don't have a priest who is out of touch with our reality. He's been through weakness and testing. He's experienced it all. Yet he did not sin. So because of that, let's walk right up to him and get what he's so ready to give us, mercy, grace. Hebrews 4. Oh, whenever you hear that phrase for the rest of your life, Jesus of Nazareth, remember why he did that. It wasn't an accident. Oh God, we love you, Jesus. We love you. And the fact that you are the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the fact that someday every knee will bow and every tongue confess. Wow. But then to read of this, that Jesus of Nazareth, you chose that for yourself so that you could feel what we feel. So Jesus, I just pray that even in this season, I know some in here maybe are going through some difficult times, maybe some are in that moment of life where they're on a mountaintop experience, whatever it is, may we know that when we come to you, when we come to you in prayer, we're not coming to someone who doesn't understand our weakness, who doesn't understand our brokenness, who doesn't understand our pain, who doesn't understand what it's like to be hangry. Thank you, Jesus. We love you. Amen. Why don't you just stand up and let's just, before we go, we're gonna take a break for another month or so before we get back together, January 14th. But let's just close out and just worship this Jesus who is so deserving.